Hi, I'm Carson Carrico, and I'm here with my guest.
Zoe Deverly.
We're going to be talking about sibling psychology through the mediums of Thor and Loki today.
Two very interesting fellows, right, Cece?
I agree. I know that in the Marvel movies, Loki's portrayed as this evil god of mischief. How is he portrayed in Norse mythology?
Well, actually, in Norse mythology, he was a lot more about balance and change. He wasn't necessarily evil. He was just somebody with characteristics that people didn't normally like, and he was also very different from what had been considered the Norse stereotype. This very tall, blonde, strong warrior Viking, which is what we see in Thor. And a lot of the reason they have such a close relationship because they're such complete opposites, and they really balance each other out, and that plays a lot into their sibling rivalry that we see within the Marvel universe.
I would agree, and I know that they aren't related. Are they related in the Marvel movies? Are they related in by blood in Norse mythology?
Actually, no. In the Marvel universe, of course, they have the Loki's adopted. He's actually a frost giant, and that isn't true.
Even though Thor and Loki are not related, I they have this kind of sibling bond, and this bond is very typical to form between even two friends, and people can form these very close relationships even though they are not of blood, the same blood. And I feel like with those close relationships, we get into this kind of zone of friendship where even though we Thor and Loki aren't blood related, that they can still bond with each other. And I feel like that's very common. I do have siblings, and I can attest that we all love each other very much, and we would agree that outside of the home, we would also be friends.
I definitely agree with that. I am, an only child, but I don't feel that I lack any, emotional bonds that you would like what you would have with a sibling. I get those bonds fulfilled by different people, close friends, my mother's aunts, uncles, that sort of thing. So I definitely think that you can be brothers and sisters in emotions and not by blood. So
Even though the Norse gods are separated from the human realm, they still possess kind of these human qualities. And we can see that in Thor and Loki's relationship because in some ways they relate to siblings in the human realm in general. They kind of closely relate to my siblings, and we play tricks on each other. We have gotten in very aggressive fights.
hopefully you haven't tried to kill any of your siblings.
Not recently.
Oh, okay.
Um, Also on that with how they relate to humans, there is this kind of argument that humans have called the nature versus nurture argument, saying that nature is kind of it's the environment and what's around you and how that affects you,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nurture, who takes care of you and what's in your blood.
And as far as the whole idea of nature versus nurture, I think a Loki is a really good representation of how both affect a person. Um, I mean, obviously, his nature is he's a trickster. That's just sort of how he is. He's one of the. I envision him if I knew modern Loki, just saw him walking down the street. I envision him as being someone who's very sarcastic, and witty. Uh, so he's just that is how his nature is. And certainly his frost giants, the fact that he's a frost giant plays into that. I mean, they're not the people that the Norse really liked. But on the other hand, I do think nurture had a lot to do, especially in the Marvel universe, with how Loki turns out. I think Loki feels a lot of resentment towards his father. That can especially be seen in the more recent Thor movies that have come out. I think he feels, sort of second class and that he's been pushed aside for Thor. And I think that is a large part of why we see Loki becoming so evil.
Let's say in this case Thor, he was kind of put on a pedestal kind of like for his fighting ability and that he was going to get the throne of Asgard. So but with Loki, he's kind of like underclass, so he's trying to overcompensate in ways, and he's trying to get the throne for himself, and doing that in any possible way to go to Odin and find a way to be under to overcome the second class nature he's
Mm-hmm.
nature's box he's been put in.
And that's definitely an invention of the Marvel universe, is this idea that Thor is in every way superior, and Loki has to prove himself. But I definitely agree with the sentiment that there's a lot of competition rivalry, and I would definitely say that a lot more of it is on Loki's end than on Thor's.
Now, I know you studied Loki in Norse mythology terms,
Mhm.
and I want to know kind of what his philosophy is, what he brings to humanity.
So I think Loki represents the not so pleasant parts of a person and humanity, which is why he takes on this role as somebody who is evil. He's really encompasses balance. He balances out these more godly gods that we have, the Odins and the Thors, with this much more down to earth realism. He represents change. No matter Loki touches a lot of things. He kind of has his fingers in lots of pies. Is sort of involved in lots of different things, and whatever he touches doesn't stay the same. He changes things, be it for the better or for the worse.
He could you said that he kind of represents the kind of like other sides of humanity that you don't necessarily see in a positive light. How much do you know about psychopathy?
Not a ton. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. Um, if I had to, just go off the psychopaths that I've heard about, Hannibal Lecter's, type, I definitely feel, especially in the Marvel universe, that he has mental issues of some sort. I'm not, qualified to diagnose that, but I definitely see the characteristics.
There is no category of psychopathy. It was narrowed down to a couple of traits in the DSM-4, which is kind of this book that has a bunch of mental illnesses, and it spiked from the third one. It was increased by over like 300 new different disorders. So it's getting bigger constantly. And they kind of have this list that has the traits of what a psychopath is. And psychopathy manifests itself into society a lot more than you would normally think it does, because our CEOs have numerous psychopathic traits. Like a trait of being a psychopath is kind of self narcissism. Mm-hmm. It's how you feel about yourself and how you talk about yourself. Another trait is kind of this feeling like if you see something gory, you're not going to have any reaction with it. And I think in ways that people kind of like shun psychopaths, kind of, it manifests itself a whole lot more. Another trait off the top of my head is this kind of mirror or camouflage effect. Like if you don't feel emotions as well, so if you see someone else being emotional, you're going to kind of copy their emotions to get the same effect. It's kind of like this overpowering sense of manipulation, which I think Loki has kind of mastered.
Very manipulative, yes.
And so, though I don't think he is a full-fledged psychopath, I think that he incorporates some of the traits very easily. Would you attest to that?
I would definitely agree that that's sort of included into the whole parts of humanity that we don't really love to talk about. I definitely think he is, I don't even know if I would say manipulative, but very, very charismatic.
Going off of that, though I don't think he is a full psychopath, I think he does have impulse control disorder, which is this disorder where you're very emotionally grounded, and so when, let's say, something doesn't go your way, you're going to react and in worst case scenarios black out and just commit these horrible actions. Like an example would be a kid losing a card game and then going and throwing anything closest to him.
I don't know if I agree that Loki is impulsive. I, in my mind, think of him as much more of a cold, calculated type killer. I think of him as somebody who I think he has impulses, and I think, especially in the Marvel universe, he's, kind of quick to anger. But I also think he's very thoughtful and deliberate in the way he does things. I don't think he's the Thor type. To me, Thor is very much like, oh, you dishonored my family, well, let me hit you with Mjolnir. I don't think Loki is like that. I think he's very much more cold and calculating. That being said, I'm sure he'll stick a sword in you just as much as the next person would, but I think he thinks about it a lot more. And we see this in, the sort of well thought out takeover of Earth and, you know, say the Avengers, that he thinks about it a little bit. He also gets himself in plenty of bad situations though, so I can definitely see him, especially in Norse mythology, getting into situations from impulse that he then has to get himself out of. He takes lots of bets in Norse mythology, you know, kind of the god of betting, and sometimes that turns out really well for him, and sometimes it does not, and that's a very impulsive trait to me.
In sibling psychology, there's this kind of air around the middle and younger children that they are not going to succeed as well as the older. And though this air is actually statistically true, the older children are more likely to go to college. They're also most of our congressmen and women and CEOs are older children, and the reasoning behind that is kind of that they're the first child. They're the first thing the parents have created or the parents have adopted, and they're going to manifest more of their time in, and they kind of build them up on this pedestal. And I feel like Thor was especially in the Marvel franchise, was put on this pedestal. And I feel that Loki is kind of feeling the brunt of that, kind of feeling like he's a bother or he won't be able to put himself on this pedestal.
I definitely agree that Loki is a victim of, you know, second born disorder, that he feels lesser because of that. But I also think a large part of that is due to the monarchical system that we see, especially in the Marvel universe. The idea that, you know, the monarch, who we see as Odin, is going to pass on his throne to his firstborn. I definitely see that as being a large part of their sibling rivalry, that when Odin dies, Thor is potentially going to take over the throne.
In words of altruism, which is the willingness to act unselfishly toward another person, I feel like, though it's not really considered a humane quality, I feel like humans have been in a pattern where they're more likely to choose money over helping someone else. And I feel like Loki may represent that in both Norse and the Marvel movies.
Loki is not an altruist. He's not. He doesn't do things entirely, you know, for the benefit of other people, as we might see, you know, like the Christian God, how he's very much somebody who, you know, or Jesus, who sacrifices himself truly for the benefit of others. Loki's not like that, but neither are any of the Norse gods. Thor isn't like that. Odin isn't like that. You know, none of these gods are people who sacrifice purely for the betterment of humanity or for the betterment of others. I mean, I think they're all in the game for themselves, because they're very much representations of humans, and we're all in the game for ourselves. You know, basic survival instincts. They're not necessarily inherently better than all of us. They're just stronger. So he's not altruistic, but none of them are. So I don't think that's a specifically Loki issue.
Okay. Sibling psychologist Bedford says that conflicts with siblings give you growth experience you wouldn't have outside the family. You get to push limits further than you usually would with other relationships. Do you think that's kind of true, especially in the dark world when they try to repair things to an extent?
Well, if I can just interject from a personal standpoint, I'm not sure that I feel like I get everything I need from siblings from other people, that I'm not necessarily lacking because I don't have a sibling. At the same time, would Loki have ever tried to take over, you know, Asgard in the Marvel Universe if there had been no Thor? Probably not. So from that standpoint, I think you could argue that yes, they're both very different people because of it. And I think we see in the Marvel Universe a very large shift in Thor. We mostly focus on Loki, but I think Loki causes a shift in Thor, because I think it really hurts Thor and makes him much more worldly when he sees what Loki does. And that he sees that he's losing that relationship, and he sees that he's basically losing who his brother was. This little boy that he grew up with is now somebody who, you know, resents him and wants to kill him. So I definitely think that has an effect on him.
And I feel like that concludes, we've hit the point of how Loki has been affected by both nature and nurture. And we have also hit how Thor and Loki relate to humans, and how Loki and psychopathy and as well as impulse control disorder relate. I feel like we really hit all aspects of the gods in general.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we get this opportunity, because I do think they have a very interesting relationship.
And I think that's why that this topic for an IB project was hard, because there are so many aspects to Loki, whether it's his sibling side or whether it's his mental orientation or even just how he's portrayed. There's just so many layers.
I would definitely agree with that. I've also been doing a project on Loki, a kind of a different aspect, and he's just incredibly complex, and he reflects how incredibly complex the Norse people were. And I also think it's very difficult to say that Loki is like this or Loki is like that, because there are so many different Lokis, and he changes personality with each one. So it's very difficult to dig out who true Loki is and all those different representations of him. But I think we've done a pretty good job.
Thank you, and if you would like us to analyze more superheroes and supervillains, please leave a like. Thank you for listening.